morning, everyone, and thank you for being here, particularly in the rain and fog. My name is Jennifer Davis Carey, and I'm Executive Director of the Worcester Education Collaborative. And thank you for joining us at the second of our forums on the Worcester Public Schools budget. The first one, as you know, was held early in November, and we probed the foundation budget and its effect on the Worcester Public Schools and the gateway cities in general. I'm proud to be here and producing this program with the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, so thank you to the members of the Bureau. Let me introduce from our host institution today, Christine Dominic. Christine is a professor of dental hygiene, and she is also an associate dean here at Mass College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences University and a member of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau Board. Christine?
Well, good morning, everyone. On behalf of President Monahan and the administrators, faculty, staff, and students at MCPHS University, I welcome you here to our bird's eye view of Worcester when not foggy. Education is very important to us. That's our business, and so we're very interested to hear what's happening in the Worcester school system.
And let me introduce our co-host today, and that's Tim McGorthy from the Worcester Regional Research Bureau. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank all of you for coming. I want to acknowledge a few of our leadership that's in the room. Normally it's a little hard to figure out who's here, but most of it's sitting at the table, which is actually a great start. So I want to thank our panelists for being here. But I also want to acknowledge City Councilors Connie Lukes, Tony Economou, and Gary Rosen, and School Committee Member Tracy O'Connell-Novick, as well as Assistant City Manager Kathy Johnson. In fact, Councilors Economou, School Committee Member Novick, and Assistant City Manager Johnson get the door prize for coming to both of our forums, not just one. So thank you. Excuse me. As Jennifer mentioned, this is a collaborative between the Worcester Education Collaborative and the Worcester Regional Research Bureau. We want to thank the collaborative for their efforts to help put this on. Public education is a key issue affecting not only the city and its growth and opportunities, but the municipal budget and how operations are funded and determined. So I want to thank the panel for being here to discuss the decision-making that goes into it. We have a few sponsors today: Commerce Bank, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, Fallon Health, and Polar Beverages. Thank you to those for helping keep these conversations alive and open to the public. And also the Telegram and Gazette for being our media sponsor today. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jennifer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. As we discussed, our panel will probe the local education budget. Looking at the budget in the context of the municipal budget, the budget as it affects the school, and then the balancing of the two types of budgets, the municipal budget and the school budget. So with that, why don't we begin? Ed?
Do you want me to come up there, or?
Up to you.
I'll just stay here, that's all right. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to sign up for that door prize because I was here at the last one too. So well, I'm glad to be here with my colleagues on the panel and all of you this morning to talk about something that's critically important to the city of Worcester, the Worcester Public Schools, and how we educate the kids that we currently have in our community and prepare an educational infrastructure that is going to be nimble and adaptive to the new students that come to our community each and every day and can meet their unique needs. I know the relationship hasn't always been a harmonious one between the Worcester Public Schools and the municipal side of government, and some of those tensions and some of those kind of rivalries, if you will, are built into the structure and how the debate kind of is intended to unfold. I've been involved in this in one way or another for a long time. I was on the school committee 25 years ago, so I've seen various iterations, various personalities as part of this process. And you know, it's not always an unhealthy thing to have that give and take, that advocacy, that back and forth. It can be a positive and productive part of the process, and you can get to better decisions. You can learn a lot. But I do think that we always have to keep in mind the shared final outcome, and that is making sure that every child in the Worcester Public Schools gets the kind of quality education that they need. I see education as a critical tool in our economic development toolbox. It is a critical tool for us to build the economic base of this city, to keep the employers that we have, to attract new businesses, and expanding the kinds of businesses that seem to have major growth opportunities, whether it be in higher ed or healthcare, biotech, bioengineering, biomanufacturing. Those kind of expanding economic opportunities really are relying on an educated, trained workforce. And we need to constantly be investing in our teachers, in our educational infrastructure, in our programs, to make sure that every child has an opportunity to take advantage of those jobs, and we provide that workforce that we're all looking for. And I think we've got, in the last recent history, some good examples of partnerships and ways that we've worked together that are different, that are outside the box. And I'm looking at my friend Patty Eppinger right here front and center, and I always hold this up as one of the things I'm most proud of, having been involved in this One City, One Library. Historically, you'd have the municipal library over here, and you'd have schools would have libraries in the schools, or in the case of our elementary schools for the last 20 years, not have libraries in our elementary schools. And the previous city manager and Patty and a team of folks in the community and Dr. Boone decided, look, we can try something a little differently here, and we can put a One City, One Library location or a branch library in each of the elementary schools in one of the elementary schools in each of the quadrants in the city. And we can envision that as something different than just a school library. We can envision it as a branch library that would be open in the after-school hours, would be open on the weekends, would be open in the summertime and the school vacation time. And let me just say, it has been a phenomenal success. People are validating that every day with the numbers of people who are going to these sites. If you look at the Goddard site up in Maine South, just in the month of September, 5,200 people went into that library. And if you go there after school and you see who's in there, it's the kids from University Park. They're having chess clubs in there, they're doing their homework, there's reading groups. That's exactly what we want to be doing in this city. Stabilizing neighborhoods, providing opportunities for young people to do the right thing, to connect with technology and literature, and the staff that are at the One City, One Library, and the programming that is developed at these locations. And it really is my goal to work with Dr. Boone and all the folks on the One City, One Library to expand that concept, because I think it works. I think it's smart. It breaks down these artificial silos about, well, that's city government's responsibility, or that's the school department's responsibility. This is our community. These are all our kids. They're all our responsibility. We have to collectively, as a community, view it that way and take down any artificial barriers that are in the way of making sure those kids and their families get what they need to be successful. Because when we do that, we're all successful. And I think that's a great example of how we're working together. I know I'm supposed to touch on, and somebody's going to be the tight timekeeper here. Let me just talk a little bit about the first budget that I put together and how I kind of looked at the issue of education and tried to make sure that as I made a budget recommendation to the City Council, that budget reflected the priority that I have, and I think that the City Council has, on education, the importance it plays in our community and in our economic development strategy. So each year the state comes out with a new minimum contribution that the municipality needs to make to support the educational needs of that community. And this year we met that, and then we exceeded that by $1.1 million. Now, just to put that in context, it may not sound like a huge number in a $575 million overall budget, but our new local aid from the Commonwealth this year was about just under $1 million. So that is the equivalent of us taking everything that we got from local aid increase and giving that to the Worcester Public Schools, and then some, as a reflection of that is a priority area for us. And because of some of the factors in the formula, enrollment last year was flat, and so that combined with how the inflation factor is used, we saw a decrease in the Chapter 70 support for the Worcester Public Schools, which I think was one of the principal reasons we had to have the reduction of the number of positions in the Worcester Public Schools that was necessary. So what we tried to do is offset that as much as we could with some additional city resources beyond what the minimum contribution was. And we tried to make another step in that direction with the council's action last night in allocating free cash and putting another $500,000 of free cash to the Worcester Public Schools, which is something that isn't done or hasn't historically always been done. But again, it's recognizing the fact that we've lost a number of these positions, and we've seen in a number of classrooms students, more than 30 students in a classroom, and we want to try to reduce the number of classrooms that have more than 30 students in them as much as possible. Again, this is a balancing act. We know just from early indications that enrollment is up this year, so our hope is that some of the reduction in Chapter 70 might be reversed, at least partially, because of the increase in student population, so that's a positive sign. But the other thing that we can do that's in our control is figuring out ways that we can be more efficient and more cost-effective in what we do in city government. And so you saw last week we made a recommendation 2 weeks ago to the City Council for another ESCO project, where basically we're looking for energy efficiencies. We borrow to put in the capital infrastructure necessary to do these energy efficiency changes, and they give us cheaper electricity, or give us the ability, in the case of the solar farm that we're going to put on the landfill down in Greenwood Street area, money that we're selling back, or electricity we're selling back to the grid that gives us credits against our electricity costs. The city's been doing this for a number of years with the Worcester Public Schools, with city bonds for new windows, new boilers. That's been phenomenally successful. Not only does that improve the appearance of the buildings, the new windows tend to really enhance the aesthetic of our school buildings, but they close that envelope and allow us to have a much more efficient use of energy in our, in some cases, 130-year-old school buildings. And over the last couple of years, that reflects about an $855,000 annual savings that the Worcester Public Schools is able to have in terms of their electricity costs, because we're working together to thoughtfully use some city capital dollars to support the Worcester Public Schools and create these energy efficiencies, or transitioning from, oil boilers to gas. And a lot of you out there probably have done this in your homes to try to take advantage of the cheaper cost of gas. And so the city is doing that, and we're not just doing that with the Worcester Public Schools, but we've been doing that with other municipal buildings. And the solar panels that we're putting on Beaver Brook across from Foley Stadium, that pretty much will completely supply the energy necessary for Foley Stadium, we won't have to buy that electricity. That's dollars that gets freed up that can go back into the classroom or other critical needs. I know we're supposed to make some recommendations. I think the one thing that I think is important is just to have a more honest and transparent discussion when we come to the budget, because you hear foundation, you hear net school spending, and the city is so far below net school spending. When we calculate net school spending, or the Commonwealth calculates net school spending, it seems to me it ought to calculate all of the costs, all of the things that the municipality does to support the public schools, just as a fair way of understanding this. And one of my recommendations to the Commonwealth would be the more than $16 million the city pays for school bus transportation. That does not get reflected in net school spending, be reflected in that. Or the nearly $1 million that the city spends for crossing guards, that does not get reflected in that net school spending. Those are real dollars that we are required to spend, and we want to spend because they're important to invest in the educational educational process of the Worcester Public Schools. But those are, in that case, just those two cases, $17 million that we don't spend on some of the other city priorities. And so at least we ought to, when the public debate takes place about net school spending, that number ought to get factored in there, because it's money that the city is investing in those areas that we don't get credit for. And again, just in the interest of transparency, that ought to be reflected in those numbers. So I have plenty more to say, but I don't want to hog all the time, so I'm just passing it down.
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I, like the city manager, glad to share this panel with everyone this morning and be able to share with the public who's assembled here today. I'm encouraged by this panel and this set of topics because it really gets to the heart of how far we've moved in the conversation. And I'm not going to use the term debate intentionally, as the city manager said, how far we've gotten in the conversation around funding public education and the significant role that public education plays in this community and every other community for economic development. We've certainly, and I want to give credit to Mayor Petty and the joint committee that has been meeting for over 2 years now, I guess roughly about 2 years, the Education Committee of City Council with Councilor Economou and Councilor Rivera at one point also, and the Finance and Operations Committee chaired by Jack Foley with the School Committee. That is if you will, at the heart of how we've been able to move these conversations from the back and forth, the finger pointing, the constant of who's on first and who's not on first and who's losing, who's winning, to really be a conversation, a shared conversation about what the role that public education plays and how do we balance that role within a city's budget in tough economic times. And so I'm very grateful to those joint efforts to really bring a transparency to the budget process. I remember when I was hired as superintendent, one of the things I heard constantly was, we don't know enough about the Worcester Public Schools budget. It's not transparent enough. We don't know where you're spending money. We don't know what your needs are. I took that to heart because as superintendent, I wear two clear and distinct hats. Yes, I am the instructional leader of the district, and that's about student achievement and how do we align curriculum and resources to get the results that our children deserve for their future and this community needs for its perpetuation. But I'm also the CEO of the district, and I'm the CEO of the third largest school district in Massachusetts, and we're waiting for those October 1st numbers because as the city manager indicated, our enrollment is up again. Springfield has been declining a little bit, not being competitive, but it would be great to be the second largest in the Commonwealth. But either second or third, we educate nearly 25,000 students in this city. And so that's a significant population of this city's residents that we're entrusted with. And so with the CEO hat is how I've approached this entire budgeting process. Our process begins, we're in FY15 budget, but we started FY16 planning 2 years ago with the FY14 budget. Gone are the days of the luxury where you can sit here and you can think about a budget going forward. We have to begin very early. We have to project ahead for years as to what our needs will be, what our infrastructure will look like. And so this year I presented to the school committee and they approved a 7-point financial plan for advancing student achievement and program sustainability. This is both wearing the CEO hat and the instructional leadership hat. That it's our compass and our guiding document for our financial planning and activities. Just as we have the Worcester Compass that includes our compact and our strategic goals as it relates to the instructional aspect of public education, we also have this 7-point financial plan that looks at continued long-term budget planning, continued annual budget review, continued transparency in the budget process, continuing our quarterly financial reviews that we've been doing very effectively, development of supplemental aid and sustainable programs, the creation of a cap on administrative spending, and identifying targets for new revenue. That's what a CEO does. I don't just sit back and wait and say the city must give me, the state owes us, the federal government hasn't this. I have to recognize the revenue sources and how do I blend those in a way to get the greatest impact for the work that we're doing. And so our budget process has multiple layers. Since I arrived in the 6 years, we've embarked on a zero-based budgeting approach where nothing is a given from year to year. We are very, very data-driven. We are very public in our data. You look through our document and this is our budget document, by the way, which we won a National Meritorious Budget Award for last year because of the quality and the content and the alignment and the specificity that's in this budget. But when we look at and think about what's happening within our budget planning process, the zero-based budgeting approach allows us to say, yes, we've made certain investments based on certain assumptions and hypotheses. Are those assumptions delivering the results that we anticipated? And if not, do we continue to invest in those? Do they need more time for maturation and results to occur? Or is it time for us to invest differently? And so throughout the recession, and I see Chris Ancola is here, and I love stating this, and I've said this to him personally, so this isn't just a public thing. But one of the articles, the editorials I keep in my top desk drawer, is the one where the T&G, the editorial board, said Worcester Public Schools would not be ready to survive after the recession and after stimulus funds, that we weren't taking those necessary actions. We are standing here and we're doing well, and so that's one of those myths clearly dispelled. But it wasn't just by faith and prayer. It was by strategic actions that we had taken to look and create our new normal, our new baseline, recognizing that within the foundation budget and the idea that inflation factor had been running 3+% annually since that formula was developed, that was no longer going to be the standard going forward. We had seen enrollment declines. We had closed about 8 schools many years ago. Now we're going through a period of enrollment increases. Last year was flat. We have increases again this year, but we're going to reach another level of plateau. But our enrollment now is at the level that we were experiencing before we ever closed the facilities. So obviously we have a number of real challenges around how many students we're educating and educating well. But our process includes a district level budget team that's cross-sector. It's the staff from teaching and learning and student supports, staff from finance and operations, HR. We look at all of the critical systems within running the school district as we think about how we build a budget. Annually, I present to the school committee and the public a school opening report that isn't just about how happy we were for our children to be back, or at least our parents were happy for the children to be back in school, but really is about the operational aspect of what it takes within the district. How many breakfast and lunch meals are served daily? How many miles our buses travel? How many students are transported daily? We also looked at the level of professional development that our faculty and staff and principals and administrators had been engaged in throughout the summer as we prepare for the work going forward. How much work had to occur in HR to accomplish what happens when you're the third largest employer in the city of Worcester? What does it take to make sure that those payroll and hiring decisions and plans are put in place going forward? And how do we plan for that? And then we talk about how we get our buildings ready for the work. One of the things that, as the city manager talks about and Mayor Petty knows very critically, the work that's been done with the Massachusetts School Building Authority and the accelerated building projects and the city's commitment to its matching share of those funds to get new roofs, windows, and boilers in many of our buildings. Do we have challenges? Yes, we do. Those are great. I'll give you a perfect example. This is not finger pointing, this is our reality, but where we don't talk about it, we make it happen within the resources we have. We were fortunate enough that Columbus Park was selected for MSBA building project, which meant a new boiler and some other systems upgrades. Grafton Street School had a boiler that failed during this year. We took the still functioning, still operational boiler from Columbus Park that MSBA deemed was ready for replacement, and now we've installed that at Grafton Street to get as many more years out of that as we possibly can. So we aren't sitting here bemoaning and whining. You don't see a headline, oh, we had to move the old boiler. That's not how we do business. But those are the realities of how we look internally to figure out how do we stretch those dollars and resources. And so that district level budget team works for several months. We meet, we look at, we do program reviews, we do budget and evaluation reviews of things we put in place to see exactly what those amount to. We work very closely with the city manager, the mayor, the members of the local legislative delegation as we talk about priorities within funding. And as we get closer to those numbers, we meet regularly with the principals and give them a voice in this. We have parent voice, we have student voice to see what's important. Several years ago, we asked students, and during the height of the recession, what would we do? How would it feel? How would it work if we levied fees for athletic participation? The students and the superintendent student advisory were very clear. They said, Miss, if you do that, most of us won't be able to play because we can play because we don't have to pay now. And so one of the things we tend to do in education is listen to the adult voice and not listen to the student voice. But these are students who say it makes a difference in our lives. Please try to protect and preserve those. So we've been able to maintain our athletic budgeting. We haven't been able to increase it in any major way, but we have restored intramural athletics at the middle school level. So our annual budget is multi-layered, takes many years and months to get to the final document. And there are several, we begin presenting to the school committee usually in February of what our revenue projections will be and what we're seeing on the horizon. And we do several other presentations prior to the final document being presented to both the school committee, city manager, and council for full vetting. I am so thankful to the spirit of collaboration and cooperation with City Manager Augustus, that we can truly talk about what it is that the city needs and talk about the schools as part of the city and not as being an island in itself. And so that has been very refreshing in terms of how we approach the budgeting process. Overall city's needs are great. The school's needs are great. Some of the things that even as we have reprogrammed dollars, nearly 2/3 of our total budget is state funded. And another third, primarily third, is city funded. And so we have seen over and over again declining state grants. We had a 13% decline in federal grants this year. And so that normal is shifting. I agree 100% with the city manager that the full cost of education needs to be accounted for in a very public manner. Regardless of what the formula looks like, credit should be given for those things that are expected. We're required to provide transportation K-6. Then there ought to be at least a comparable accounting and alignment for that transportation, since that is a state mandate. And as we look forward to what's happening, there are so many things in education that are not being funded. We look now at a mandate of homeless transportation, and yet there continue to be reductions in homeless transportation, and yet we have probably 2,500 homeless students in Worcester Public Schools. We also deal with the fact that we've not been able to grow and expand programming within the Worcester Public Schools. We struggle with the number of high school students who have, sometimes I'm embarrassed to say, 2 study halls a day in their schedule because we don't have enough resources to create additional electives. And this year, we reduced almost 90 positions in the district. 44 of those were teaching positions, and now enrollment is up. So we're thankful for that free cash alignment that allows us to address some of our most critical needs. I think as we think forward for the foundation review, obviously we need to look at those things that have been underfunded historically. There's a $1 billion underfunded figure statewide for special education and healthcare costs based on the early assumptions from the 1993 formula. For Worcester Public Schools, that would represent an additional $35 million for students with disabilities in our special education services, and an additional $25 million for the district that would, again, support the healthcare needs that we're going forward. But we also have to think about what the budget, the current foundation formula is solid on. And in the 21st century learning environment, technology, class sizes, the supplemental supports for social and emotional needs of students who are dealing with trauma. And ladies and gentlemen, those aren't only our immigrant students who are here from new countries. They are families, middle-class families who suffered through the recession, lost homes, lost employment, and see that experience. The idea of program expansion, the vision for a lot of different things that we have within the district, and how do we address some of our infrastructure needs, particularly eliminating those study halls. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Good morning, everyone. My name is June Arasi, and I'm very pleased to be here this morning to talk to you about some of my experiences as an educator in the Worcester Public Schools. I retired November 1st after 30 years as a teacher and a principal, but more importantly, my 3 children all attended Worcester Public Schools from pre-K through 12, and so you might say I have a very vested interest in the Worcester Public Schools. I've been a principal at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. I've had the opportunity to be part of a school that started from scratch, University Park Campus School, which is a collaboration between Clark University and the Worcester Public Schools. And people often ask me, well, what's the difference between the 3? And my answer is always, the kids are bigger, and that's about it. There's challenges at all different levels, but the overarching responsibility of a principal is to raise student achievement and to hold your school-based accountability for student learning. And it's really hard sometimes to get creative with the budget. I'm going to talk more from the humane point of view than the budget point of view, because that's what I know. When you see the faces before you every day and you see the children that we work for and the families that we serve, I think it's so important that we set goals when we talk about spending money at the school level. We need to identify the needs in the building, and we do that by looking at disaggregated student data, what particular needs our students have and how we can best serve them. We always focus on performance outcomes, and we try and align our goals with the resources that we have. Fortunately, we have a process now, since Dr. Boone has been here, that we have resource allocation meetings prior to setting our table of organization for the coming school year. And before we go into those meetings, and every principal thinks that their school is the best school and needs the most, as it should be. And so I don't like to say we have competing agendas, but it's very important to recognize the needs of your particular school, and when you go to your allocation meeting, to advocate for the things that you need and to make sure that your voice is heard. I think that the principals in this city will agree that we're very lucky to have that forum. I've been doing some work in other cities since I've left, and I know that's not the case in other places. So I think that's something that really should be a model for other cities that I'm working in. I also think it's important to have clear communication among your staff, your families, and your children. Listen to what they need. Of course, just like principals have their own agendas, teachers also have their own agendas, and everybody thinks what they need is the most important. So I think it's important to continually revisit and reevaluate how you're allocating your resources to make sure that you're getting the optimum benefit for the children. That always has to be the baseline of what you're doing with your school budget. And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about aligning the resources within the school. Human capital, for example. In the schools that I worked in, and I know most principals share this belief with me, the arts are very important. And I always want to make sure that my art, music, phys ed teachers have what they need to do their job well so that we can educate the whole child. And I also feel that it's incumbent upon the administration of the schools to schedule their staff in such a way that they optimize human capital, in that art, music, or specials, as we like to call them in the school world, allow teachers to have common planning time to work together so that they can align their instruction to best serve the children. I also think that school goals, of course, are aligned to the district goals, and we have to learn to strategically and deliberately build consensus and prioritize initiatives. For example, one thing that I noticed when I became principal of Claremont Academy, which is my second principalship, is that a lot of initiatives that had been in place for many years were still in place, but not really. And new initiatives were brought in, but the old ones were still kind of left hanging there. So I think it's important to always make sure that, you know, in with the new, out with the old, and not have kind of programs that are just left hanging in the air, not really taking up funding that could be used for something else. And I think that's really important. But the most important thing, of course, is to maximize our investments in teaching and learning so that every child in the Worcester Public Schools has a great education every day. And I think it's incumbent upon the principals to get creative and to learn how to manipulate the resources that they have. Instead of, as Dr. Boone said, you know, it's not our way to complain and whine about what we don't have. It's incumbent upon the principals to make it happen, to schedule the resources and make sure that everything is in place to optimize student learning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'm supposed to talk about balancing and being the referee in the schools in the city side. I realized quickly when I was elected mayor, I had a number of constituencies. I had parents who sent their kids to the Worcester Public Schools. I had residents of Worcester who did not send their kids to the Worcester Public Schools or had graduated and had moved on. I had my constituencies also include the Worcester School Committee, I found out quickly, and the Worcester City Council, and also the superintendent and city manager. And after 2 months on the job, I realized also I have to want to go see a neck doctor because I felt like a referee at the Wimbledon. that incoming serves are coming pretty fast from both sides. And what I did, I realized quickly people understand the facts. And I think that was brought out in the last couple years. So both sides understand each other's situation. I had Jimmy Dawson-Norrie look at net school spending and do an analysis of it. So I had an independent party presented to both the city council and the school committee so we could understand net school spending in a better light, which worked out well. And as been mentioned, I had the subcommittees from Tony Economo and Jack Foley on the school side meet on a regular basis to discuss the issues so everybody would understand what both sides were facing. Because this is a balancing act. There's a number of things I want is on the city side to implement. We didn't do a police class this year. And we gave additional funding to the schools because we thought that was important because the schools are laying off people. We had some programs that they needed to complete. And next year we'd probably be talking about a police class again, be put into the budget. But also some of the issues I'm facing is, you know, we talk about the accelerated high school, otherwise known as the exam school, which I think is important, but there's a cost associated with that. Now, where's that money going to come? And where's that priority is going to be in the superintendent's and city manager's budget? So there's a balancing act, and the fund in this superintendent has mentioned that the needs are great in the Worcester Public Schools, and I think they're underfunded in the Worcester Public Schools. I think if you really look at that, it was 1993 when the foundation budget was done. A lot of things have changed. I know there's a commission now that's doing a statewide listening tour on the foundation budget. And things that, as Dr. Boone has mentioned, special education was underfunded probably from the very beginning. And there's a $35 million gap. It's $35 million in the public schools. Imagine what you would do with that money. Healthcare is another, as Dr. Boone has mentioned, another $25 million. And put that into the foundation. And also there's a thing called inflation factor, which they used, my understanding is in 2010, they used the inflation factor at the lowest quarter So that has a multiple effect. Now going to 2014, 15, that's another $10 million that goes to public schools. That was part of the reasons we did have layoffs in this past year. So, and I know some people you look at, they say, well, Jesus, what's the public schools? And I was probably one of these people who was on, well, and I wasn't the mayor saying, well, you get $300 million, you should be able to do well with that. But you learn quickly that the needs are so great. You know, and I know throwing money at things that's always the solution. And, but if you look at what superintendent has done, and the teachers and the principals, when you have a level 4 school, and you have money that's focused, additional funding because of that level 4 school, and all of a sudden that school becomes a level 3, 2, and 1, because they have the resources and the leadership in order to get there. And I think that's a good example. I think when you're looking at this foundation budget, people should be looking at, you know, how do you fund the gateway cities? You should look at those collectively and separately, because you know you struggle with, you know, we get criticized because we meet minimum foundation budget every the school spending every year, maybe a little bit over, maybe a little bit under. And the number always changes depending on what happens with transportation. That's a $15 million nut every single year that was the public schools has to fund. But we should be looking, as we look at the foundation budget, we should be looking at the gateway cities on a separate basis, I think, and look at all the needs that really these cities that we have and how we address it. Because I think it's proven when you have the resources to do things. And it's not all about just the budget. It's all about we do these innovation schools. We have 7 of those schools, and those are public schools, and those make a difference. And, so it's about leadership, and it is about funding, and funding at the right. In the right places. But I think the city manager Augustus was hired. I asked him to make sure you look at the list of public schools like you do your own departments, and making sure they're part of the city family, that we're all in this together. And we're not going to have you know, consensus every single time, but if we have at least the facts presented right in every single budget, we can have that discussion where our priorities are. And maybe we don't go away happy, maybe we do, but at least we're closer to getting working as a city and moving the city forward. Thank you.
We have time for questions, so if you have a question, please stand. And
Yeah.
are there any questions from the audience? Yes. Is that Roberta?
I'm also a past member
Okay.
of the school committee and former mayor, and when I got on the school committee, there was a real question about special ed and whether it was being used for the purposes for which it was intended. And there were headlines saying that special ed was a dumping ground for discipline problems. How have we dealt with that program in terms of accountability, regulation, control, to make sure that real needs are being met and not convenient needs?
Special education is based on a set of federal laws and requirements and regulations. And so the process that we engage in to identify a student as having a disability, not just a behavioral problem or a difference, is very regulated, very stringent. One of the hats and the background pieces that I bring to the table is that of a special educator. And so the way in which I look at special education is, one, are we affording students an opportunity for success prior to assigning them a label of a disability? So what are the supports that we put in place? It used to be, and not just in Worcester, but nationally, if a child wasn't having success, whether it was behavioral, academic, whatever else, it had to belong to special ed, and they were the ones to fix it. And so then everybody else had hands off. But instead, what we've done with special education is figure out this student is a student first. Now the student is experiencing academic and or behavioral challenges. What are the supports that we put in place to give the student the chance to be successful? And if those supports aren't working, how do we go to the next level of evaluation and support that may result in identification and additional supports? And so honoring that, implementing that identification process with fidelity and making sure that we have supports on the front end before identifying is important. You will hear a term that's used a lot now within educational circles, and it's referred to as response to intervention. Those are very strategic and focused efforts to provide interventions from students before they get to the point of needing the graded level of identification. We spent time looking at what we know about who we were identifying as having a disability and who was being served and how were we serving them. There have been some clear inequities, again, not just Worcester, but everywhere in our data, and we are working to make sure that we're providing what students need. If a nominal or minimal level of support will get a student over the hump of the challenge, then they don't need the level and the intensive services that go along with special education. That's why we've begun to see in some schools a declining numbers of referrals for special education, and we've also seen our numbers begin to stabilize. I'm very concerned. Massachusetts leads the nation in the number of students identified as having a disability, and that's because we go so much further beyond, so far beyond what the federal regulations require. And that's one of those balancing acts that we've got to deal with. But even within that, making sure that we are identifying the appropriate students for the services and not just becoming that dumping ground.
Dante.
Hi, hi guys. Thanks for this morning. It's very informational. So I hear and seeing a lot from folks in the community that you don't solve problems by throwing money at it a lot. But bottom line is when you look at some of our performing schools, in particular our new level 4 school, you'll hear about things like the school some classrooms not having enough textbooks for students to come home and do their homework with, and it's hard. While that's not, I'm sure that's not the only reason why that school's looking for a school. It's hard not to hear that kind of stuff and not think that funding is part of the problem. And so, I mean, I hear you guys saying that you're doing the best you can to fund their schools, but a recent poll by the Worcester Labor Coalition shows that 84% of Worcester's registered voters think that we should be doing more to fund our schools. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, in particular from the city manager and the mayor. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, I defer to you first.
I don't think that's working.
No, I agree. Like I was saying earlier,
I'm
this
not
is
sure.
on.
I don't think it's
I
working.
don't think it's
Oh,
working.
as I said earlier, that I think with the right funding in place, and it's been shown, I think Union Hill is a perfect example, and other schools, because we had extra resources from the state. I think Governor Patrick and I think Tim are in the back. They made a priority to education, and then when the school became level 4, increased funding. So that's an example where it works. But I agree with you. There's so many different priorities, and I know that if we threw more money at schools, I think schools would do better. There's no question about it in certain areas. We just don't have the funding. One of my priorities is really looking at the 3 high schools and doing the 3 high schools over again. And there's a balance now between capitalizing the capital budget, the 3 schools, the high schools I want to do over, and probably one of the junior high schools. It's going to take time to get, but it's a priority of mine. It's a priority of the city council and the school committee is to do those 3 high schools. That costs money. What costs? Do I defer maintenance even further? We're in competition, let's face it, with all the surrounding towns, and people come to a city, move into a town because of the schools, because of public safety, and economic development and jobs. And I get that, and I think the city manager should pretend to understand that, and that's why we're probably going to have some issues this year when we find over the budget. The priority of the city council is going to be to put a police class on, plain and simple, maybe even a fire class. And that's going to be balanced against all the other departments and also the school department when we make those decisions. But we're with you. There's only so much money to go around, and I think that's why if you look at the foundation budget as they go, and there's a meeting like people want to attend it. It's January 24th at Bay Path Regional High School, talking about the foundation budget. I think we can change that, and the gateway cities are looked at differently, and hopefully we can change the funding for them.
Two things. I want to answer Dante's question, but I also want to just make sure I highlight the fact, and I think the superintendent mentioned it, how critical the role that the mayor and that joint committee with the school committee and city council played in helping us educate all of the decision makers in the budget process and understand, because sometimes things get a little cloudy when people are doing their heartfelt advocacy and doing the best they can to make the case, and you know, when you trying to make a case for something you believe passionately about, you tend to give your side, and there's usually another side, and that's the balancing act that those of us in decision-making positions have to make. And having that joint committee and the leadership of the mayor and the joint committee really helped us make sure that when one argument got presented, the other side of the argument at least got factored in so that we could make good, thoughtful decisions. So that really was a critical part, I think, of putting us on a good trajectory here. I get the poll. I bet you if we did a poll and said, does the registered voters of Worcester want more police officers, it would hit at least 84%, if not higher. And that is the balancing act. Those police officers, those firefighters provide public safety for those kids and for those schools and for the whole community. And again, that's how we're trying to look at this as one community. We have tried to think about creative ways. So when we're doing our Union Hill initiative that the mayor charged us to work on, we specifically, as we looked at infrastructure improvements in Union Hill, I looked at Union Hill School. And we're going to do the streets and the sidewalks around Union Hill School. So that we're trying to lift the neighborhood, but we're trying to support the school there and the safe access to that school. I see Senator Moore in the back of the room. He recently brought an issue to us around flu shots. And I guess historically the Medicare will reimburse the Commonwealth and the local communities that give flu shots to children $22 per shot. But historically, the city has kept that $22. And I said, well, that's crazy if the school department is actually organizing the shots. And it's not only helpful to the school department because we want kids in school every day possible. We know any time out of school is detrimental to that student achievement. But we also know that a lot of these kids are going to homes that have 2 or 3 generations living with them. So when that child goes home with the flu and grandpa's living in that home, it can have very severe public health consequences for our whole community. So again, it's not just helping the Worcester Public Schools, although it's doing that, and that's a worthy thing to do. It's helping our overall public health needs as a community. So I think if we're open to saying to ourselves, how do we leverage what we're currently doing? Not, that's a school department, that's a city. This is a whole community. That's how kids live. That's how families live. They don't live in a bifurcated way. They live, you know, going to school in safe streets that are plowed, safe neighborhoods that have the police and fire protection and code enforcement and all the other things they need. And so we're trying to look at ways that we break down those silos and not that us and them. Stop.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, Tim.
I think the word used under Chapter 70 is adequate funding for education, the base minimum requirement. Is adequate the right term to use in terms of Chapter 70? Do you feel it provides an adequate basis for education? If the debate every year is on how much to exceed Chapter 70, you know, is it adequate at a higher level than we currently have it at? You know, you've all touched on Chapter 70 a little bit, but you know, how does that definition play into your thinking about funding?
I know the superintendent's probably chomping at the bit for this one. So, but I would say adequate. I mean, we're not saying our aspirations for our kids is to be adequately prepared for the 21st century, right? Nobody has that dream for your kid or your grandkid, right? Our dreams and our aspirations are to make sure kids are as well prepared as possible for all of the things that they're going to be required to do in the future. And so part of that is what we do in terms of providing them the resources to get there. So that would be my answer.
And I think we have to look at how and when are we defining adequate. Because what was adequate in the 20th century educational system in 1993 is no longer adequate in the 21st century learning environment. I mentioned that the state has been silent on technology in infrastructure in terms of education, and yet gone are the days where technology is something nice if we could afford it. Technology is an integral part. It doesn't replace a teacher. The best offense and great student achievement is an outstanding teacher before those students and great building and district leaders. But we have to have appropriate resources to get at how we serve children. And so to the mayor's point about what's different in gateway cities, you know, I always say very clearly, urban education is not about how children learn, or that because children are defined that they're in an urban setting, that they learn differently. Urban reflects a way in which we live. What are the things that draw people to urban centers? The arts, parks, infrastructure, all of those things, thriving restaurants, all of the things that make a great quality of life. But in doing that, we also find much greater diversity in urban settings, which is also an asset. So yes, we have students who are English language learners. There are those who would define that as a drag on the educational funding, and I say that's part of our asset of living in a diverse culture and community. And so we have to think about what's the definition of adequate and when are we defining it, because what's not working with the formula now is a set of assumptions that were adequate in 1993 and have long since found their place in an archive, if you will, in terms of adequacy for 2014 and beyond.
Charlie?
Just wanted to follow up on that question, and I agree with the mayor's comment that just throwing money at education doesn't automatically bring improvement, but I also come from the perspective of knowing that as competent and caring as all the people we have working in schools can be, there have to be a minimal set of resources to meet needs. I'm wondering if the superintendent could comment on funding at the level we're able to fund now, the foundation budget level. What are the areas that you most yearn for additional, if additional resources were available, what are the things right now that cause you the most pain in the way the district might be able to function with the resources we have? Maybe the top 3 to 5 items that you said that are our greatest needs right now as a school system.
Class sizes are obviously a real critical need. You know, one of the things that I've spent a lot of time as an educational leader paying attention to is what are the realities and what are the perceptions that parents will seek when they choose not to have public education. And so when we look at what goes on in private and parochial schools, usually class size is one of those indicators. Research is very clear that unless class size gets 12 or below, it's marginal change in affect between 13 and to 20. But it is a perception for parents who feel that their child can get personalized attention from that teacher. It is a reality for the teacher who's trying to balance the multiplicity of needs of the 20 plus students in that classroom. So I use the term reasonable class sizes. In preparing our students, and as the school committee at my recommendation changed our graduation requirements to align with the Mass Core, which means our students will have more math, science, foreign language opportunities, and will be able to compete more effectively with students across this Commonwealth for college and careers. We then have to support the additional elective opportunities that are necessary for students to meet that, as well as the appropriate classes. We've been able to maintain and increase through the recession and now maintain 23 advanced placement courses. The average private or charter school or parochial school does not match that number, and if you take more than 1 or 2, you have to pay additional cost fees for that. Those 23 advanced placement courses are available across our district, and most of our schools have almost the full complement of 23. And so, but what are the other pieces of the pie that we want? We look at the success of linking what happens between the relevance of the academic and the connection to what the career would be, even if college is the pathway to the career. So how do we expand Chapter 74 in career tech ed, career vocational tech ed options in our other comprehensive high schools. Not just simply trying to replicate what we have at Worcester Tech, but what are things that we used to have that have been lost to funding, and how do we strengthen that? So the whole career and vocational technical education piece is significant. I talked about that in my recent State of the Schools message. I think the other thing, what are the supplemental supports that our students need? We hear across gateway cities the social emotional needs and challenges of children. I see Diane Bruce here, and she knows from conversations we've had any number of times and groups that we're with, the whole issue of the behaviors and concerns that preschool children are presenting with, and how do we attack those early on so that they don't become a barrier to student achievement later on. Every year as we meet with principals, we could double the number of school adjustment counselors that we have in place. We could double and triple the number of what are the folks that we have? Wraparound coordinators. I lost it there for a moment. The wraparound coordinators that we have in schools who are doing the work of linking children and families to the necessary community supports, so that if you can stabilize the family, help support a family to stabilize, then the child doesn't have to worry about whatever is going on at home or whatever they're faced, or the parent can then help focus on how to support the child with their learning and not just those basic needs. So wraparound coordinators, those school adjustment counselors, those to support the social emotional needs. And again, general program expansion, what we can do for additional libraries. Libraries are not just places where we keep books and you check them out. They're information centers. How do we strengthen what's happening in our libraries? K-12, pre-K-12, and though they are mandated at the secondary level and we don't have them at the elementary level, how do we continue to build that infrastructure, and what are the academic supports we put in place for teachers, principals, and students? So those are the things that keep me up at night.
Yes.
Just, it was a great panel and a lot of distinguished people, and I'm particularly glad to see June Aracey joining this panel. And my question, I guess, maybe doesn't involve a lot of money, maybe a little bit of money, but in anything that I've seen kind of in Worcester over the years, or even around the state in terms of successful schools, particularly in our urban schools, is about leadership and leadership principles, that they're constantly communicating to the stakeholders, the superintendent, as you had mentioned, parents, the students, the teachers. Every day, common purpose, common goals, aspirational. And the successes that we've seen with the innovation schools in Worcester, Worcester Technical High School, others, and just what I've seen around the state is those principals are just able to do that. Just how do we create that as kind of the exemplar, the model, train? That is just so important, because you know, we all struggle with the money issue, but at the end of the day, if we're training and teaching our principals about how to leverage you know, people's time, resources as much as possible, it's a successful model. I'm just curious on.
I certainly want June to address this from her perspective, both having been a principal and then a quadrant manager supporting principals. But I think, Mr. Murray, to your point, there's still people in our traditional industrial mindset in New England that it's labor and management needs fewer supports than labor does. And so one of the things that we have not been able to continue funding through the school committee has been appropriate leadership supports for principals. You know, we used to have in place mentoring and programs for principals. We're working now with Teachers 21 and cobbled together a few dollars and begged them to let a few of our folks in to do some of that leadership training and development that you were talking about. The role of the principal has moved so far from being building managers to really being instructional leaders and making those connections with all of the key stakeholders and making the connections with the community. As June said, principals see their world. I say they see 1/44 of what I have to see. I have to look at the entire picture, but to all 44 of the schools. And so we do have to invest in the professional development and leadership support for principals to experience that success and to be able to for those who are veteran principals to make some of those shifts from managers to truly being about leaders. And leaders are about stepping out in front, taking risk, and getting people to go along with you and hearing what it takes for success.
Thank you. I think too, it's important for principals that are currently serving to cultivate and nurture talented staff. I think that building from within and learning to share your leadership is so important in making systemic change. We have some great leaders in the Worcester Public Schools, and like every other organization on earth, we have some not so great. And I think that Dr. Boone gets it exactly right when she says that the principalship isn't what it used to be. It's not a managerial position. It's not making sure, you know, of course it's that too, but it's so much more important. The needs of our families are so much more complicated than that. And I think that the role of the principal in these times is so, it's enormously mind-boggling, truthfully. And to be an effective principal, you have to learn to share your leadership. You have to be transparent, and you have to kind of make sure that your staff is with you and constantly articulate your vision for student success. And in doing so, I think that we help build the leaders that are going to take our place.
One more question, Lillian?
I would like to know how the city is working with the key stakeholders in the city, like the corporate stakeholders, the hospitals, higher education, to support the Worcester Public Schools. What are the kinds of projects, partnerships, and plans you would have, grants you be seeking?
Well, I think just another example is the One City, One Library, where so many of our colleges and universities were responsible providing the funding that allowed us to put these library resources in our schools, as well as, I forgot to mention, our mobile library that services the other 30 elementary schools. So it has library staff on it. United Way was good enough to pay for the vehicle itself, so that we made sure that these weren't just 4 islands, but all of the kids in our elementary school. And so we had a lot of corporate sponsors, we had a lot of higher ed partners that helped us provide those kind of resources. It's one example.
Our lights don't come on daily without the support of our higher ed and community partners. Every school, the district, I mean, just Monday, we spent time thinking about ways in which we address the alignment and the thinking to Councilor Luke's question earlier about special education and how we serve all children well. And in that professional development opportunity, we had key community partners and higher ed partners at the table, because it does take us all. And so, you know, often I hear people say, well, higher ed needs to do more. And I welcome the community to come and see what higher ed does. It's not just about the giving of the dollars, but it's being, the higher ed and community businesses are thought partners as we develop ideas and programs for going forward. We collaborate and seek and achieve grant opportunities jointly. The Central Mass Workforce Investment Board, Quincy, all of the colleges and universities, we share programs, grants, and same thing with businesses. So there's so much that goes on, and I need to publicly again thank higher ed and the business community for honoring a request I made when I first arrived, to let me get the lay of the land, to figure out who's doing what are the needs, to identify the gaps, and then to ask partners to come with us to help fill the gaps. And that's the way in which these partnerships have developed and evolved. And so they have been wonderful, and we continue to figure out how do we go to the next level with these. I come from a community that had a wealth of colleges and universities like this one, but the partnerships didn't feel and play out like they do here. It's very different.
I think just quickly, the other thing is a lot of our colleges and universities have dual enrollment programs for our students, so students can take classes on our college campuses, get college credits for those classes, which, you know, in some cases can mean thousands of dollars of a head start when they do enter college, as well as just the help in preparation for being successful in college. And both our colleges and universities, I think a lot of our businesses have pipeline programs with the Worcester Public Schools. So I know at the technical high school, if you go through that program, because of the quality of the program, because of the alignment of the program with the needs of some of our employers, you can automatically be hired to National Grid or some of these employers. So I think, you know, the more of those types of opportunities we can provide our students with is a clear understanding of what you're learning and its application in the real world, and a clear kind of pipeline either to higher ed or to employment, I think just kind of strengthens the relationship and make sure that what happens in the classroom is really reflective of what's the skills and the knowledge needed in the real world.
I am going to invoke facilitator's privilege here and ask one final question, and this is to June. One of the things I think we've all heard, at least anecdotally, is that classrooms teachers struggle with supplies and consumables and so forth for their kids. Kids from wealthier households are able to supplement those, but kids from lower income households are not. Could you talk a little bit about how that plays, if that plays out, at the school level and at the classroom level, and how teachers address that?
Well, of course, everyone always wants more than they have. I think that this is important to the conversation that we're having today, because as the principal, you have the autonomy to manage the budget within your school. And my personal belief is that if you see a need in your school, like a shortage of textbooks or a shortage of supplies, then that should be your first priority as a principal, to make sure that the children have what they need. There's also my last school that I worked at, Chandler Elementary, which was a level 4 school, now a level 3. We had lucky enough to have a wraparound coordinator who developed really strong partnerships with neighborhood groups, and those groups and agencies were able to help us supplement things for the kids that didn't have what they needed. And I'm not talking so much about school supplies there, I'm talking about warm clothing and different things for recreational activities. I think that if the principal manages the budget on the school level well, there should be enough for every child to have what they need. If they don't, maybe the principal needs to re-examine the way they're spending their money, because teachers spend a lot of their own money anyway. It's probably one of the only professions where you spend more probably, or as much that you make. I mean, teachers are very generous and they love their kids, but they shouldn't have to do it. If they do it because they want to, it's one thing. If they do it because they have to, then there's something wrong with the way the funds are being allocated by the building principal.
Thank you. Tim, any final words for the good of the order?
No, I just want to thank our panelists for coming. I think it was a great discussion, very insightful. I want to thank the audience for being here. Follow up on the education topic on Monday of next week at 3:45 at Worcester Technical High School. The superintendent is doing double duty by coming back to moderate a panel on educational standards and testing in Massachusetts and how it relates to Worcester. So please join us again on Monday, but otherwise, thanks for coming.
One final word before everyone
Grab your mic.
Thank you all once again. Look for more partnerships between the Worcester Education Collaborative and the Research Bureau, and we'll keep you posted on our spring program. So thank you, everyone.